There is a particular kind of silence that surrounds a man who has decided to stop being ordinary. It is not the silence of defeat, not the quiet that follows surrender, and not the emptiness of someone who has given up on the world. It is something far more dangerous, far more deliberate. It is the silence of a man who has turned inward with a sword, who has looked at his own reflection with cold, unforgiving eyes and said, with full understanding of what that declaration costs, "I will not remain this way." That silence is the beginning of everything worth building. That silence is the seed of the self-made man. And the story of how a man arrives at that silence, how he lives inside it, and how he eventually emerges from it holding something the world cannot take from him, that is what this document is about. Most people move through their lives in a kind of comfortable sleepwalking. They wake in the morning to alarms they hate, travel to jobs that drain them, return to homes that feel like resting places between obligations, and fall asleep rehearsing worries. They call this living. They call the small reliefs, the weekend, the holiday, the promotion, success. They have been taught, from childhood, that this is the shape of a proper life. Work hard, be patient, wait your turn, depend on the system, trust the institution, follow the path that was laid for you by people who walked it before you and never questioned whether the destination was worth reaching. This is the life that has been sold to the majority of the world's population as the only life available, and most people buy it without reading the terms and conditions. But somewhere in that population, in every generation, in every culture, in every economic condition, there are men and women who wake up not from sleep, but from the deeper unconsciousness, and realize with a clarity that is almost physical in its intensity that they have been living according to a script they never wrote. They realize that the weakness they feel, the frustration that burns quietly in their chest, the sense that something is profoundly wrong with their situation, none of it is caused by the world outside. It is caused by the self they have allowed themselves to become. And when that realization lands, when it truly lands and not just flickers like a thought on a difficult Monday morning, something fundamental shifts. The man who receives that realization has two choices. He can swallow it back down, distract himself, and return to the sleepwalking. Or he can pick up the sword. This document is for those who pick up the sword. Part 1: The destruction of the weak self. The first and most important thing to understand is that the weak self is not your enemy in the way that enemies are typically understood. An enemy is something outside of you. An enemy stands across a field, identifiable, visible, capable of being fought with conventional weapons. The weak self is not across a field. It is inside the house. It has been living in your house for years, sleeping in your bed, speaking with your voice, making decisions in your name, and draining resources you didn't even know you had. You have been funding its existence. You have been defending it when others criticized it. You have been making excuses for it, protecting it from discomfort, and, most damaging of all, you have been calling it you. That is the first and most critical mistake. The weak self is not you. It is a construction. It is a collection of habits built from fear, patterns inherited from people who were themselves afraid, beliefs about limitation absorbed from an environment that had nothing to gain from your expansion and everything to gain from your compliance. The weak self is not who you are. It is who you were trained to be. And, because it was constructed, it can be dismantled. Because it was built, it can be destroyed. This is not a metaphor. This is a literal, strategic, and methodical process, one that requires more courage than any external battle, because external battles are fought against things that can be seen. This battle is fought against something that wears your face. Understanding what the weak self looks like in practice is the first step toward destroying it. The weak self is the voice that tells you to wait until conditions are perfect before you begin. It is the instinct that says not yet, not now, maybe later, maybe when things calm down, maybe when you have more money, more time, more support, more certainty. The weak self is the part of you that flinches in the face of judgment and alters its behavior based on what others might think. It is the part that craves validation before it will move, that needs someone else to confirm that the goal is achievable before it will commit to pursuing the goal. It is the part that chooses comfort over growth every single time there is a genuine choice to be made, because comfort is familiar and growth is uncertain, and the weak self will always choose the familiar over the uncertain even when the familiar is slowly killing it. The weak self is also, and this is perhaps the most insidious form it takes, the part of you that is fluent in the language of reasonable excuses. It does not present itself as weakness. It presents itself as wisdom. It says, be realistic, be practical, be cautious, don't get ahead of yourself, think about what could go wrong. And none of these things are inherently wrong. Realism has its place. Caution has its place. But, in the hands of the weak self, these virtues become weapons of self-suppression. They become the bars of a cage that you build with your own hands and, then, mistake for shelter. The weak self is so good at disguising itself as reasonable thought that many men spend their entire lives listening to it and believing they are being wise when they are simply being afraid. Destroying the weak self begins with a single act of radical honesty, the kind of honesty that most people will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid. It begins with sitting down, in silence, without distraction, without the comfort of a screen or a substance or a conversation to hide behind, and asking yourself with absolute seriousness, what would I be doing right now if I were not afraid? Not what you should be doing. Not what would make others proud. Not what is safe or approved or endorsed by your social circle. What would you be doing if fear, in all of its disguises, including the disguise of reasonable thinking, were removed from the equation entirely? The answer that surfaces in response to that question is the truest piece of information you have about yourself. It is the direction. And, whatever distance exists between that answer and your current reality is the distance you must cover. That distance is the territory of your transformation. The process of destroying the weak self is not accomplished in a single dramatic moment, though there are moments of drama along the way. It is accomplished through the compounding effect of 1,000 small decisions, each of which is difficult in proportion to how deeply the weak self is entrenched. Every morning that you rise before you are ready is a small destruction of the weak self. Every commitment you keep when no one is watching is a small destruction of the weak self. Every time you choose the difficult conversation over the comfortable silence, every time you pursue the goal when discouragement is loudest, every time you refuse to make an excuse that would be entirely believable and entirely accepted, you are chipping away at the architecture of who you have been and building the architecture of who you intend to become. There is a brutal arithmetic to this process that no one likes to talk about because it violates the modern belief that growth should feel good, that transformation should be accompanied by affirmation and encouragement and community support. The brutal arithmetic is this: in the early stages of destroying the weak self, you will feel worse before you feel better. You will feel the discomfort of the unfamiliar. You will feel the anxiety of operating without the safety nets you have come to depend on. You will feel the peculiar loneliness of a man who has decided to outgrow his old life before his new life is fully constructed, standing in the gap between who he was and who he is becoming, with the old world receding behind him and the new world not yet visible ahead. This gap is where most people retreat. This gap is where the weak self makes its most convincing arguments. And this gap is exactly where you must hold your ground. Because the truth, the actual, demonstrable truth, is that every man who has built something worth building has stood in that gap. Every person whose life you have looked at and admired, whose discipline you have respected, whose results you have envied, they stood in exactly the same gap you are standing in. They felt the same discomfort, heard the same voice of doubt, faced the same temptation to return to the familiar. The only difference between the man who emerges on the other side of the gap and the man who retreats back through it is the willingness to keep moving when movement is uncomfortable. That willingness is not a character trait that some people are born with and others are not. It is a muscle. It is built through use. And, the first time you use it, it will be weak and trembling and uncertain. But, it will be working. And, that is all it needs to do at the beginning. The destruction of the weak self also requires a ruthless examination of the environment in which you have been living. Environment is not merely physical, it is social, informational, and psychological. The people you spend the most time with are not simply companions. They are architects. They are continuously, whether they intend to or not, shaping the architecture of your beliefs about what is possible, what is acceptable, what you deserve, and what you should expect from your life. A man who spends his primary hours with people who have resigned themselves to mediocrity will find his own ambition slowly eroded, not through malice, but through the relentless pressure of a worldview that has no room for the extraordinary. Resignation is contagious. So is ambition. The question is which contagion you are choosing to expose yourself to. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths in the entire journey of self-made success, because it carries implications that feel ruthless. It suggests that some relationships, some friendships, some family dynamics, some social environments are actively working against your becoming. It does not necessarily mean these people are bad or that they should be condemned. It means that their current frequency is incompatible with the frequency you are trying to inhabit. And the man who is serious about destroying his weak self must be honest about this incompatibility and make decisions accordingly. He does not have to make those decisions cruelly. He does not have to announce departures or deliver speeches or burn bridges with theatrical finality. He simply redirects his time and attention toward the environments that are aligned with who he is becoming. He gravitates toward people who challenge him, who hold higher standards, who speak the language of possibility rather than the language of limitation. And, over time, his world reshapes itself around the man he is in the process of becoming. The final element of destroying the weak self is the construction of an internal standard, a measuring stick that exists entirely independent of external approval. The weak self measures its worth by the opinions of others. It needs applause to feel successful, agreement to feel right, and validation to feel safe. The strong self, the self you are building, operates from an internal standard that does not fluctuate based on what others think. This internal standard is built through the consistent alignment of action with value. Every time you do what you said you would do, even when no one is watching, even when you are tired, even when the payoff is not immediate, you are constructing this internal standard. Every time you act in accordance with the person you are trying to become rather than the person you have been, you are laying another stone in the foundation of a self that cannot be shaken by the opinions, criticism, or indifference of the external world. When a man has built this internal standard, when he has made it the sole judge of his worth, something extraordinary happens. The judgments of others lose their grip. Criticism becomes information rather than injury. Praise becomes pleasant but not necessary. The approval of the crowd stops being a requirement for action and becomes at best a pleasant byproduct of it. The man who has destroyed his weak self and built this internal standard is not arrogant. He is not dismissive of others or contemptuous of their views. He simply no longer requires their confirmation to move forward. He has his own compass. He has built it himself. And that compass points in one direction only, forward. Part 2: The strategy of winning alone. There is a version of ambition that the world endorses, a loud, networked, collaborative, socially validated ambition that announces its goals publicly and collects accountability partners and posts progress on platforms designed to reward visibility. There is nothing inherently wrong with this version of ambition. For some people, in some contexts, it works. But there is another version of ambition, quieter, more dangerous, and ultimately more powerful, that operates in the dark. It does not announce. It does not seek witnesses. It does not require an audience to sustain itself. It draws its fuel from an internal source that is not subject to the fluctuations of public opinion or the drying up of other people's encouragement. This is the ambition of the man who wins alone. And winning alone is not a consolation for those who cannot build community. It is a strategy. A deliberate, sophisticated, and often misunderstood strategy for building the kind of success that is genuinely, unassailably yours. The first principle of winning alone is the understanding that silence is power. In a world that rewards noise, that equates visibility with value and announcement with achievement, the man who operates in silence holds a strategic advantage that most people do not recognize until it is too late. When you announce your goals before you have achieved them, you engage a psychological mechanism that works against you. The social reward of the announcement, the encouragement, the admiration, the sense of being taken seriously that comes from telling people what you intend to do, provides a feeling of accomplishment that has not been earned. Your brain, which cannot fully distinguish between the feeling of having done something and the feeling of being recognized for intending to do something, partially satisfies the goal-seeking drive through the announcement itself. And, because that drive has been partially satisfied, the urgency to actually do the thing diminishes. You feel like you have already moved, even though you have not moved at all. The man who wins alone understands this. He keeps his intentions private. He builds in the dark. He does not post about his process. He does not seek approval for his direction. He does not ask the room whether his vision is reasonable. He moves. He works. He builds. And, when the work is done, when the structure is standing, when the results are undeniable, when the goal has been not merely announced but achieved, then the world sees it. Not as an intention. Not as a plan. Not as a possibility. As a fact. And facts require no validation. Facts exist whether the audience approves or not. This is the power of silence. This is what it means to let your results speak while your process remains protected. The second principle of winning alone is the radical acceptance of full responsibility. Not partial responsibility. Not the kind of responsibility that acknowledges your role in your outcomes while leaving room for circumstances, other people, and bad luck to share the blame. Full responsibility. The understanding that regardless of what has happened to you, regardless of the family you were born into, the resources you did or did not have access to, the opportunities that were or were not extended to you, the disadvantages that were real and documented and unjust, the response to those circumstances is yours. Always. Completely. Without exception. This is the most liberating and most terrifying principle in the entire philosophy of self-made success. It is liberating because it places the power to change your situation entirely in your own hands. If everything is your responsibility, then everything is within your power to address. You do not have to wait for the world to become fair. You do not have to wait for the system to change, for other people to recognize your worth, for circumstances to align in your favor. You can move now. You can build now. You can begin now. The present moment, however imperfect and, however, stacked against you, contains the beginning of your transformation. And that beginning is yours to take, independent of any external condition. It is terrifying because it removes every excuse. The man who accepts full responsibility has nowhere to hide from his own failure. He cannot blame his upbringing. He cannot blame the economy. He cannot blame the people who didn't help him or the people who actively worked against him. He must look at every outcome in his life and ask himself, with the kind of honesty that takes real courage, what did I do, or fail to do, that contributed to this result? And, what am I going to do differently going forward? That question, asked sincerely, answered honestly, and acted upon consistently, is the engine of the self-made man. It is the question that never lets you stay comfortable in your failure. Because failure is not something that happens to you, it is information about what needs to change in your approach. And information is not something to grieve. It is something to use. The third principle of winning alone is the cultivation of what can only be called strategic patience, which is different from ordinary patience in the same way that a trained athlete's stillness before a race is different from the stillness of someone who has simply given up. Strategic patience is not passive. It is not the patience of a man who is waiting for something to happen to him. It is the patience of a man who is building, consistently and systematically, toward a specific outcome, who understands that the timeline of genuine success does not match the timeline of immediate gratification, and who has made his peace with that mismatch without allowing it to become an excuse for slow movement. The world in which we live has developed an almost pathological relationship with speed. Everything is instant. Gratification is expected in seconds. Information arrives before it can be processed. Results are demanded before processes have been allowed to mature. And, in this environment, the man who is capable of playing a longer game, who is capable of working for months or years on something that will not show visible results until it is ready to holds an advantage that is increasingly rare and, therefore, increasingly valuable. Because most of his competition has been conditioned to expect quick returns and has lost the capacity for sustained effort in the absence of immediate feedback. The man who can work in the silence of delayed reward, who can sustain his effort when nothing appears to be happening, who understands that the roots of a tree grow long before the tree is visible above the ground, this man is building something that cannot easily be matched by those who can only work when the results are already showing. Strategic patience also means understanding the sequence of success. There is an order to things. There are foundations that must be laid before structures can be built. There are skills that must be developed before opportunities can be seized.
There are internal conditions, discipline, clarity, resilience, self-knowledge, that must be established before external conditions can be reliably shaped.
The impatient man skips the foundation and builds directly on desire, which is why so many fast starts collapse under the weight of the structure they were never prepared to support. The strategically patient man does the foundational work even when it is invisible, even when it is unglamorous, even when the people around him cannot see what he is doing and cannot understand why he is not moving faster toward visible results. He knows that the foundation is not wasted time. The foundation is the reason the structure will stand when others fall.
The fourth principle of winning alone is the fierce protection of your mental territory.
Your mind is not a passive space. It is a battlefield. And, in a world that is saturated with information, opinion, ideology, distraction, entertainment, and the continuous noise of other people's agendas, the protection of your own mental territory is not a luxury. It is a survival requirement. Every piece of information you allow into your mind shapes, to some degree, your beliefs about what is possible, what is real, what you deserve, and how the world works. Most people have made their minds completely open access, anything can enter, everything is welcome, the scroll is endless and the filter is minimal. And, as a result, their mental landscape is a cluttered, contradictory, anxiety-producing mess that makes sustained clarity and intentional action nearly impossible. The man who wins alone builds walls.
Not the walls of ignorance, not the rejection of information or the refusal to engage with perspectives that differ from his own,
but the walls of selectivity. He chooses, with genuine deliberation, what he allows into the architecture of his mind. He is careful about the media he consumes, because media shapes beliefs. He is careful about the conversations he participates in, because conversations shape thinking. He is careful about the narratives he allows himself to rehearse internally, the stories he tells himself about who he is, what he is capable of, and what the world will or will not allow him to achieve.
Because those internal narratives are not mere descriptions of reality. They are instructions. The mind that is repeatedly told it cannot build something will find excellent reasons not to build it. The mind that is repeatedly exposed to evidence that things are possible, that people in worse positions than its owner have achieved greater things, will find ways to build what it is told is worth building. This is why the man who wins alone reads carefully. He reads biographies of people who have built things against serious odds, not for the inspiration, though inspiration is a pleasant side effect, but for the evidence. He reads to populate his mental landscape with proof that the thing he intends to do is not unreasonable, that the difficulty he is facing is not unique, that the gap between where he is and where he is going has been crossed before. He reads philosophy, strategy, and the honest accounts of failure and recovery, because these teach him not what to think but how to think, how to reason clearly, how to separate signal from noise, how to remain anchored to his own judgment when the world is loudly insisting on a different conclusion. He also manages his information diet with respect to the present, the news, the social narratives, the cultural conversations that compete for his attention every day. This does not mean he is uninformed. It means he is deliberate about the form and frequency of his information consumption. He decides what to know, when to know it, and how much attention to give it. He refuses to allow the rolling anxiety of continuous news consumption to colonize the mental space he needs for thinking, building, and creating. He is present in the world but not consumed by it. He is aware of reality without being controlled by it. This is one of the quietest and most underrated forms of discipline in the entire practice of self-made success. The fifth principle of winning alone is the construction of an identity that is forged, not inherited. Most people's identities are given to them. They are shaped by family, culture, geography, religion, class, and the accumulated weight of other people's expectations. There is nothing inherently wrong with the identities given to us, they carry heritage, connection, and the warmth of belonging. But an inherited identity, if never examined and deliberately reshaped, will always contain the limitations of the environment that produced it. It will carry the ceiling of the community that built it. And the man who intends to go beyond that ceiling must at some point engage in the uncomfortable work of separating his chosen identity from his inherited one, keeping what is true and valuable, releasing what is limiting, and adding what is deliberately constructed in service of who he is becoming. This is the work of becoming the author of your own story rather than a character in someone else's.
It requires the willingness to question beliefs that have never been questioned, to examine assumptions that have never been examined, and to arrive at conclusions that may be significantly different from those of the people you come from.
This process can be lonely.
It can create friction in relationships that were built on shared, unexamined assumptions.
It can feel like a kind of betrayal of the world that made you.
But it is not betrayal. It is the most honest form of respect for your own potential. You cannot honor the gift of your life by living it in a form that was designed for someone else's comfort. The man who forges his own identity, who decides, deliberately and consciously, who he is and what he stands for and what he will not compromise, is not abandoning his roots. He is growing past them. He is building something that those roots can be proud of. Part 3: The Architecture of the Self-Made Life. What does it look like, in practice, when a man has destroyed his weak self and has committed to winning alone? What does the daily texture of that life feel like, from the inside? What does the self-made life actually require, not in theory, not in the language of motivational poster philosophy, but in the granular, unglamorous, daily reality of a man who has decided to build something genuine in a world that is not designed to make that building easy? It begins, as all genuine things begin, with structure. The man who has decided to build his life on his own terms is not a man who waits for inspiration. He is not a man who works when motivation finds him and rests when it doesn't. He understands, because he has experienced the alternative and found it insufficient, that motivation is a byproduct of action, not a prerequisite for it. He does not wait to feel ready. He acts, and readiness develops in the acting. His life is built around structures and systems that produce the right behaviors regardless of how he feels on a given morning, because he knows that how he feels on a given morning is not a reliable indicator of what needs to be done.
The goal does not move based on his mood.
The structure holds regardless.
This structure is not rigid for its own sake.
It is not the structure of a man who fears chaos and clings to routine as a form of control. It is the structure of a man who understands that freedom is built on discipline, that the discipline required to maintain a structured approach to his goals is precisely what creates the freedom to pursue those goals effectively. The athlete who trains every day regardless of how he feels does not train because he loves the training. He trains because the training makes him free to perform at the level he has chosen for himself. The writer who writes every day, whether the words come easily or not, does not write because inspiration is always present. He writes because the practice of writing is what creates the conditions for inspiration to arrive. The entrepreneur who reviews his goals every morning, who tracks his progress with ruthless honesty, who protects his most productive hours from interruption and distraction, he does not do these things because they are comfortable. He does them because they are the price of the life he intends to build. The daily life of the self-made man is also, and this cannot be overstated, a life of ruthless prioritization.
There are not enough hours in any day to do everything.
There are not enough days in any year to pursue every opportunity, to respond to every distraction, to say yes to every request, to attend every meeting, to participate in every conversation. The man who wins alone has made peace with this arithmetic, and he has used that peace to develop a clarity about what matters, a clarity so sharpened, so consistently applied that it sometimes looks, from the outside, like indifference or arrogance. It is neither. It is the result of understanding that every yes is a no to something else, and that the man who cannot say no to the things that don't matter will inevitably find himself unable to say yes to the things that do. This prioritization extends to relationships, to opportunities, to how he spends his attention, and to how he spends his energy.
Energy is finite. Attention is finite. Time is the most non-renewable resource in existence.
The man who wins alone treats these resources with the same care that a business owner treats capital, not hoarding it, not refusing to invest it, but investing it deliberately, in places where the return is real and aligned with the direction he has chosen. He is generous with his energy toward the things that matter. He is unapologetically protective of it against the things that don't. And he has developed the wisdom, through experience and reflection, to tell the difference. Within the architecture of the self-made life, failure occupies a position that is radically different from the position it occupies in the life of the ordinary man. For the ordinary man, failure is a verdict. It is a judgment rendered by reality on the merit of his effort, and it carries the weight of meaning, of identity, of worth, of the fundamental question of whether he is capable of the things he hopes to be capable of. For the self-made man, failure is a data point.
It is information.
It tells him something specific and useful about the gap between his current approach and the approach that will produce the result he intends. He does not enjoy failure.
He is not masochistic about it.
But he does not allow it to become a story about who he is, because he knows that the story he tells about failure is more determinative of his outcomes than the failure itself.
This is not a trivial distinction.
The man who experiences a failed venture and concludes that he is not cut out for entrepreneurship has used a single data point to construct a comprehensive narrative about his capacity, a narrative that will then shape every subsequent decision he makes. The man who experiences the same failed venture and concludes that he needs to adjust his approach, revisit his assumptions, and try again with better information has used the same data point to generate a direction rather than a conclusion. The outcomes of these two responses, compounded over years, are not slightly different. They are incomparably, irreconcilably different. One leads to a life shaped by the fear of confirming the story. The other leads to a life built by the sustained engagement with the challenge. The self-made man also has a particular relationship with comparison, specifically, the relationship of not engaging in it in the way that the weak self demands.
The weak self is obsessed with comparison.
It is continuously scanning the environment for information about how it measures up, who has more, who has achieved faster, who is further ahead on what the weak self has decided is the single track on which all competitors are running. This comparison is poisonous, for several reasons. The most obvious is that it is always selective. You compare your internal reality to other people's external presentation, which means you are comparing your behind the scenes to their highlight reel, and the comparison will always be unfair to you. The less obvious reason is more important. Comparison to others is a distraction from the only comparison that actually produces growth. The only comparison worth making is between who you are today and who you were yesterday. The only question worth asking is whether you are moving, however slowly, in the direction of the person you intend to become. That question, asked and answered honestly on a daily basis, is the only competitive framework a self-made man needs. The architecture of the self-made life is also built on a foundation of learning that never stops. The man who wins alone is, without exception, a student not in the formal sense of sitting in classrooms and collecting credentials, but in the deeper sense of approaching every experience, every failure, every conversation, every book, every observed success or failure in others, as a source of instruction. He has understood that the moment he stops learning, the moment he decides that he knows enough, that his current understanding is sufficient, that the question has been answered and the inquiry can close, is the moment his growth stops. And, the moment his growth stops, the architecture he has built begins, imperceptibly at first and, then, with increasing speed, to deteriorate.
This commitment to learning is not about accumulating information.
The information economy has produced an abundance of facts and data that vastly exceeds any human being's capacity to absorb. The self-made man's commitment to learning is about the continuous refinement of his capacity to think, to reason well, to see clearly, to separate cause from effect, to understand systems well enough to navigate them and, when necessary, to build them. He reads for this. He reflects for this. He seeks out people who are better than him at specific things for this, not to be mentored in the sentimental sense, but to be exposed to ways of thinking that have produced outcomes worth studying. He treats every domain he needs to master as a world that deserves his serious engagement, and he brings to that engagement the same standard he brings to everything else: full effort, honest assessment, and the willingness to revise his approach based on what he learns. The life built on these principles, on the destruction of the weak self, on the strategy of winning alone, on the architecture of structure, responsibility, learning, and relentless forward movement, is not a comfortable life in the conventional sense. It does not offer the comfort of belonging, because the man who is building something genuinely his own will often find himself operating at the edge of the understanding of those around him. It does not offer the comfort of approval, because the standards he has set for himself are his own and may not match those that his environment has endorsed. It does not offer the comfort of certainty, because no genuine building project comes with a guarantee, and the man who refuses to move without a guarantee will not move at all. What it offers instead is something more durable than comfort. It offers the satisfaction, deep, quiet, and unshakable, of a man who looks at his life and recognizes himself in it. That recognition, the experience of looking at your daily existence and seeing, in it, the reflection of your actual values, your genuine ambitions, and your true character, is what separates the self-made life from the life that was made for you by default.
It is not always beautiful. It is not always successful by the metrics that other people apply. But it is yours. It was built by your hands, with your decisions, according to your design. And the man who has built something with his own hands knows, in a way that the man who simply received things cannot know, exactly what it is worth. There is one more thing that the architecture of the self-made life requires, and it is perhaps the most counterintuitive element in this entire document, because it runs against the image of the lone builder, the solitary warrior, the man who needs nothing from anyone. The self-made man, despite everything that has been said about winning alone, is not a man without love. He is not a man who has traded his humanity for his ambition, who has shut down his capacity for connection in the service of his construction. The destruction of the weak self is not the destruction of the sensitive self. The development of inner strength is not the development of inner coldness. The man who wins alone is not a man who has decided that other people don't matter. He is a man who has decided that his relationship with other people will be built on something real, on the strength of what he has actually built rather than the performance of what he hopes others will believe about him. Because genuine relationships, the kind that sustain a man through the long campaigns of building, that provide the context of meaning that makes the effort worth undertaking, require you to be real. And you cannot be real with others if you are performing a version of yourself constructed to manage their perceptions. The self-made man, because he has done the work of becoming genuine with himself, becomes capable of the kind of honesty in relationship that the weak self could never afford. He does not need people to validate him, so he does not need to perform for them. He does not fear their judgment, so he does not hide from them. He brings to his relationships, with partners, with children, with friends, with collaborators, the same quality of presence and integrity that he brings to his work. Not because he is performing virtue, but because the line between who he is in public and who he is in private has, through the sustained practice of alignment, largely dissolved. This is the final destination of the journey. Not the achievement of a specific goal. Not the accumulation of a specific amount of wealth or recognition or influence. The final destination is the self, the authentic, constructed, deliberately chosen, fearlessly inhabited self that exists on the other side of all the comfort-seeking, all the excuse-making, all the performances of safety that the weak self required to survive. The man who has traveled through the destruction of his weak self and, through the strategy of winning alone and, through the daily construction of the self-made life arrives at a self that is, finally, not trying to be something. It simply is. And, in that being, in the quiet, undefended, powerful fact of being exactly and, fully and, unapologetically who he has built himself to be, he becomes something that the world, with all of its judgments and, comparisons and, expectations and, demands, cannot touch. This is the man who cannot be destroyed by others. Not because he is invulnerable. Not because he is immune to loss or failure or criticism or the capriciousness of circumstances. But, because what he has built, what he carries inside him, the standard he holds, the identity he has forged, the discipline he has cultivated, the integrity he has chosen every day in the face of every temptation to choose otherwise is not contingent on external conditions. It does not depend on the economy, on other people's behavior, on the approval of the world or the absence of its disapproval. It is his. It was built in the interior. It lives in the interior. And, what lives in the interior cannot be taken by anything that approaches from the outside. The world will test him. It tests everyone. It will send failure when he expects success, silence when he hopes for recognition, obstacles when he needs clear roads, and doubt when he needs certainty. It will take things he worked hard to build and force him to build again. It will show him, repeatedly and without apology, that control over external outcomes is always partial and always temporary. But, through all of this, the man who has destroyed his weak self and built something real in its place will do what such men have always done. He will look at whatever the world has sent and he will ask, quietly and without drama and with the deep practical calm of a man who knows exactly who he is, what do I need to do next? And, then, he will do it. That is the whole story. That is what it means to win alone. Not to win in isolation.
Not to win without the love of others or the beauty of the world or the warmth of connection. But, to win from a source that is entirely, irreducibly, unassailably your own. To carry inside you a fire that does not require other people's wood to burn. To build a life that is the unmistakable signature of the man who lived it, not the life that was handed to him, not the life that was expected of him, not the life that was safe or approved or endorsed by those who had nothing at stake in his becoming. The life he chose. The life he built. The life he earned by first becoming, through the most difficult and most necessary of all battles, the man capable of building it. That man cannot be destroyed. He has already done the hardest work of his own becoming. And the self that emerges from that work, forged in the honest fire of self-examination, hardened by the sustained practice of discipline, and made permanent by the accumulated proof of his own integrity, is not a self that the world was given. It is a self that the world was shown. And there is a difference between those two things that changes everything. The weak man waits to be rescued. The strong man rescues himself. And the man who has rescued himself, who has walked into the fire of his own insufficiency and come out the other side carrying something real, that man stands in the world not as a supplicant waiting for permission, but as a builder who has already proven, to the only judge whose opinion truly matters, that he is capable of everything the life he intends requires. Win alone. Build alone. Become alone. And, when you have become it, everything else will follow.